Hello, Kester from Active Health Clinic. So this is a follow-up video from my first video explaining the polyvagal theory. So if you're not familiar with the theory, go and check that one out. But essentially, this video is more going to be about specific strategies and ways to kind of implement a basic understanding of this theory in terms of, in the context of managing invisible illnesses. If you think about the three states, aside from just not being so functional, day to day to be in these states, if we think about a fight or flight, feeling anxious, feeling really restless and uncomfortable, you're not necessarily accessing your prefrontal cortex. So thinking logically, you're in survival mode, so it's not going to be very functional. And then, similarly, but in different ways, freeze is not very functional as well. Feeling dissociated, numb, depressed, immobilized, low energy. It's not really going to be a very productive state to be in. So essentially, we want to figure out ways to move in towards a social engagement state, ventral vagal, so down regulate. Specifically, when we're thinking about invisible illnesses, if you've watched some other Active Health Clinic videos, or you just understand invisible illnesses, pacing is super important. A lot of these conditions cause a reduction in the amount of activity that you can tolerate, whether that's physical energy, cognitive, emotional, sensory. So therefore, when we're thinking about energy conservation through pacing, it's really important that we're able to identify and move ourselves back into a social engagement, because this fight or flight state takes a lot of energy, and this dorsal vagal state just isn't very functional. It's also, I think, fair to say that when we're in a massive setback or a flare up, and our symptoms are really higher than normal, it's generally a fair assumption to say this is more associated with a dorsal vagal response. You say if you've pushed your body past what it can tolerate, and symptoms go really high, that's your nervous system kind of forcing you to slow down. So if we think about being in a free state, we want to identify what does that feel like, and then we want to think about how do we move ourselves back towards a more regulated social engagement ventral vagal state. As the kind of line determines, we generally move up and down in that fashion. So sometimes in a freeze, it might be helpful. We're not necessarily trying to cause a fight or flight response, but it can be helpful to kind of mobilize, potentially move our body gently. We don't have to go crazy, but move and do something. When you're in this state, naturally motivation is going to be pretty low. It's going to be very hard physically to do those things, but if you can just do something really small, that can help you kind of move back down. If you can tolerate, it might be just like a splash of water on your face. Basically we're trying to promote mobilization and kind of engage our prefrontal cortex, have some thought. Then we have identification of fight or flight. So we talked about this in the last video. So palpitations, anxious. As I said, this is really, really taxing. If we're in here for too long, often we're going to get to this freeze. And if we think about if we're running on adrenaline for a really long time, in the context of invisible illnesses, that's often going to lead to a flare-up or a setback of symptoms. So really important with our pacing that we're able to identify and down-regulate into a social engagement state. And so just think about if we're going from sympathetic to ventral vagal, it's about calming, engaging in activity that promotes relaxation. So this is going to be different for everyone. Like, you're going to have things that work better for you, and there's going to be other things that work better for others. But some specific activities might just be some slow, deep diaphragmatic breathing. Generally, less breath cycles per minute is associated with a higher heart rate variability, and then a more kind of regulated state. And there's lots of different breathing exercises you can do, but general principles would be trying to slow it down and actually use your diaphragm. You know, if you think about when we're in a very anxious state, it's chest breathing, it's very shallow, you know, lots of breaths, potentially we're holding our breath. So you really want to promote conscious breathing, longer inhales and exhales, engaging your diaphragm. Anything that, as well, other activities just get us connected to our body. So I think that tends to be reasonably consistent across, you know, trying to move down. You know, even with the freeze, we're trying to move and mobilize, but even with this, sometimes, you know, if you're feeling really fidgety, restless, potentially there's a bit of energy that you need to get rid of, but in a productive way. So it might just be doing some like mindful movement or yoga nidra, something like that, that gets you more grounded and connected to your body. Cool, so hopefully that helps you understand this theory and provides a bit of a framework in helping regulate your nervous system. Obviously, this is just a theory. These 3 states don't necessarily exist completely separate from each other, like it's on a spectrum. Cool, but yeah, hopefully that helps. Thanks.